The world looks to California to answer the hard questions, for redemption, to introduce the unfamiliar, to be resilient. Because California bounces back, holds us accountable, values who we are, remains vigilant, defies those in our way, and stands for community. Here on the West Coast, we're at the center of it all. Los Angeles Times, the state of what's next.
Hey, Malcolm, you know that Audible's got a lot more than audiobooks?
Of course, podcasts,
Originals,
bestsellers,
future bestsellers,
sleep stories.
sleep story. What are you talking about, sleep story? Malcolm. Oh, wow. Malcolm. Malcolm. Hey, no, Roxy. Hey, Roxy, get out of Malcolm's house.
The most inspiring minds, the most compelling stories, all in one place. Audible.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for tuning in to the 26th annual Los Angeles Times Festival of Books and our virtual event with Terry Crews and Rebecca King Crews, creators of the Audible original title, Stronger Together. I'm Michael Ordona. I cover film and television for the Los Angeles Times, and I will be your host this fine evening. Terry Crews, as you probably know if you're watching this panel, is an action movie hero, sitcom star, playable video game character in Crackdown 3, I think. His most recent films are Sorry to Bother You and Deadpool 2, though many of you may know him as President Camacho in Idiocracy or Sergeant Terry Jeffords on Brooklyn Nine-Nine. He's also a high-end furniture designer, by the way, and these days he's also known as a human rights activist. He was named one of Time Magazine's 2017 Persons of the Year as one of the silence breakers for speaking out about his own experience with sexual harassment as part of the Me Too movement. He also has the unspeakable honor and privilege of being married to his co-author, Rebecca King Crews. Rebecca King Crews is a singer-songwriter, musician, and actress. She's best known for her family's hit reality show, The Family Crews. Before we get started, though, I want to remind everyone, if you're interested in purchasing Stronger Together, you can check it out on Audible. So, without further ado, let's welcome our guests, Rebecca King Crews and Terry Crews. Yay!
Hi, Michael. Hey, how you doing?
Hi, guys. Thanks so much for joining us. I should tell you in advance, we have an unusual number of reader questions or audience questions, so I may jump out of talking about your book to ask those questions, just so you know.
Okay.
All right, so let's get started by talking about the start of your book, the where, the what and the why of it. What drove you to write it? What were the things that you felt like were so important to get off your chest that you absolutely had to get them out in the world?
I know.
Well, Terry's book Manhood, which was written in 2015, chronicled his upbringing and his kind of troubled childhood. And he went into great detail about some of the things in his life that he felt had kind of squandered or stunted his growth as a man. And some of the things he shared in the book involved our marriage. And so one of the key questions that we got from so many people after Manhood came out was, what did Rebecca think of all of that? And
Right.
so instead of answering 100,000 DMs and emails that we got during that time, we decided to write a book about our marriage together and how we restored our marriage after betrayal and infidelity and addiction. And we shared this book because we knew there are other couples out there that are going through or have gone through or will go through some of the similar things. And we really wanted to be a beacon of hope for people who want to save their marriage in spite of those obstacles.
Yeah. The biggest thing that happened, we were actually in Vietnam, and I was speaking. I do a lot of speaking engagements all around the world, and it's all about success and motivation, but also about introspection and correction and trying to find a better you. But I get really deep, and I get really, really raw and into all the wrongs and different things and the wrong ways that wrong things that I've done. And at the end, near the end, by the question and answer, there was this lady got up and she just basically said, "How did your marriage survive?" Like, she just was in the most how did you get through this? And I looked at my wife, who was in the front row, and I said, you know what? I'm going to let her answer that question. And Rebecca got up, and it was her conference after that. It was so groundbreaking, so enlightening, so special. We knew, I mean, coming home from that meeting, we said, this is it. It gives everyone a 3D view, because usually you got to either have a book that has the male view or you have the female view of whatever's going on. But here is a 3D perspective, which I think is groundbreaking.
I'm glad you brought that up. Writing it together, it's certainly an interesting format, particularly in an audiobook, to have both of your voices. There are times when you two interact, and that sort of elevates the material, I think. And I had heard that story about you bring her on stage during that talk you're giving in Vietnam. So what did the experience of writing it together and narrating it together reveal for you? What did it open up about the material for you? I mean, I take it that part of that was keeping each other honest, right?
Yeah, but I have to say this, there are things I didn't know. You know what I mean? You think you know everything. You think you've heard it. And in writing this book, there were things that I discovered that I had just learned for the first time. And believe me, a lot of times we got into also where we came from. Yeah. The reasons why things work and the reasons why they didn't. I like to always call it, cause and effect. There's always a cause to something that's, when you look at the effects of a marriage or a relationship and the whole thing. And we had to really delve deep into our past. And there were things I had just never known about my wife, and I thought I did, but it was just eye-opening.
I don't know. For me, writing the book I can't say there wasn't a lot I didn't know about Terry, because I think I was a better listener in the marriage than he was. What was revelatory for me in writing the book, and especially together, was how little I had talked about my own past as a public figure, and how little I had talked about many of the things that I'd gone through, primarily because I had done so much of my own healing work in my teens and my 20s that it was kind of gone and forgotten for me. And so in my public persona, wherever that took itself, I never talked about being abused. I never talked about having an alcoholic parent, because I had dealt with all that, and I'd forgiven my stepfather, and I had moved on from a lot of the trauma in my family, and did not live with that as a present reality, and didn't really think it was affecting my marriage. Looking back now, I realize that probably part of the reason I endured as much as I did, because I've had many women say, girl, I would have left him a long time ago, was because I was the oldest sister. I took responsibility for everyone. And so I probably had an inflated sense of personal responsibility for my family. And so I think I learned a lot about myself writing the book, I feel.
Terry, how did that make you feel to discover some of those things? I mean, I take it that the abuse at the hands of her alcoholic stepfather was one of the things that was new to you. How did you feel about discovering that?
Well, actually, I knew the tip of that, it's like some of it, but it never in detail, just simply because, these are some things that made me angry. And at the time, he was still alive, and still around. And I think Rebecca, she knew what kind of person I was at the time, that, I was not a nice guy, so to speak. So I think that she was very, very, careful in revealing certain things, simply because, just the fact that we would interact with them. I don't think at the time, I don't know what I would have done. I'll be honest with you. And so Rebecca has done a lot of things to preserve our marriage, but also to preserve me, because I had a very, very short wick. And I'm just telling you, it's, comes from an NFL and, coming from Flint, Michigan. And, I had to learn very, very young to be violent. I was a very violent man. And I bring this up in the book and, the experience with, to the point where I actually shocked myself, where I was like, I didn't know I could go that far, and I had never hit Rebecca or anything, but it was one of those things where there were times I scared myself. I had a lot of pain and a lot of anger. And Rebecca spent a lot of time navigating
calming
those
him down.
Yeah, she was just, and so now after the years of therapy and the years of tears and being able to come to grips with a lot of the past, she can now tell me this stuff. Whereas before, I could see why she wouldn't do it.
Well, and I want to say too, in fairness to that, as we were working on the manuscript together, and I saw the things he delved into in his childhood, I realized that the book might be kind of uneven if I didn't delve into some of my own pain. No. Because I didn't want the readers to get this kind of pristine picture of my life, like, oh, I'm just this girl from Gary who showed up in Terry's life in college. Mm-hmm. And I realized that I just had a different way of dealing with my past. And my husband was much more vocal about his past than I was. So for me, it was a challenge for me to be that vulnerable and that open about a lot of things that I had just, I prayed over them and went to therapy over them, and then I buried them. I didn't talk about it anymore because to me that was someone else. All the things that I went through at that time, I now look back at it like that was someone else that happened to. That's not me.
Oh.
Because I'm a new person.
Terry, you just touched a little bit on the topic of toxic masculinity, which I definitely want to get back to, but I wanted to say, Rebecca, that chapter when you're describing your encounters with your alcoholic stepfather, that's the most harrowing stuff in the book. I think that's like the part of the book where you're a little scared when you're listening to it. But coming out of this, what you just said was, it's like one of the most positive possible outcomes of this exercise for you guys of writing this book, that now you're at a point where you can tell each other these things, where you can share these really traumatic, important things that help shape you. I mean, that what you just said sounds really positive to me, that you've reached that point with each other. not to speak for your relationship or your marriage.
Well, I want to say you really can't tell it until you're through it.
Yeah.
While we were in the middle of this, I mean,
yeah,
it was a mess. I mean, 3 years of constant tears and sorrow and
fighting,
heartbreak and fighting,
packing my bags and unpacking my bags.
It was a brutal time. And I have to tell you, what can I say? Now that we're 10 years past it, we were able, and in writing the book, I wrote the book in 2014, came out in 2015. 5 years past that, I was a lot more comfortable with confronting and saying, what would be considered controversial things. And, so the introspection that comes from that really provides clarity. I mean, looking back, you can really start to dissect where things went wrong or where things went right. I think every person in the world needs to write a book. I mean, truly, so they can examine all the things that make them tick. And I'm thankful for the experience. I'm thankful that I get this chance to do this about our marriage. And to do this with my wife is just something that's extremely rare.
To those in the audience who haven't yet listened to the audiobook, I should explain that what they're talking about, the event that they're talking about, is described in the very beginning of the book. So it's not a spoiler of any kind. They call it their D-Day.
Yes.
What would you like to describe that rather than have me describe what D-Day was?
You want to?
Well, I call D-Day the day that lived in infamy in the Cruz house.
Yeah.
it was the day that I left my husband. And we had had an argument, and he confessed after much prodding and stabbing on my part and a couple sleepless nights with his conscience. He confessed that he had been unfaithful, that he had a porn addiction, and that he'd been hiding it from me for the entire marriage. And I had already begun to suspect there were some things wrong with him. And then on top of that, I was unhappy in the marriage. I was lonely. I was a work widow. I had 5 kids who never saw their father. And that just wasn't my dream. That wasn't what I dreamed of when I got married. And after 20 years of it, or 21 years, I was done. And it felt like dying. I felt like somebody stabbed me like 1,000 times with an ice pick. And I just laid on the floor and mourned the death of my future and my dreams and all the things that I had hoped for between the two of us and for our children. And it was a really sad day.
So if I could just explain a little bit more to the audience, the book starts there actually, and then traces back to their childhoods, goes into some of the things that made them who they are, and then goes back to that point and looks at their efforts to heal. Would you say that's a fair description of your book?
Yes.
That's it.
Yes.
That's it. I mean, you know, our marriage was resurrected because it was dead. It was 100%.
It was dead
gone.
and buried, and it started to stink.
Yeah.
Graphic. I wanted to say one more thing though about the format of your book. The way the book is arranged, you hear both of their voices narrating their own stories, and then they interact at times. One thing, Rebecca and Terry, that I liked about it was that there are moments when you disagree in your own narration. I think that's I think it's a really healthy thing to put in a book about keeping your marriage healthy, right?
It's very, that is the essence of what marriage is, you know.
Yes, because my husband's favorite way to describe his life is through the use of hyperbole. I always call him Mr. Extra, Mr. Over the Top. Everything is amazing and everything is fabulous. And I'm like, no, it's not.
You know, this is one thing that we actually is new over the past 10 years, is this refreshing honesty. There were times where I would just nod along with what Rebecca said. I would nod yes, and I would mean no. And that would cause resentment, serious resentment in me. And, you know, I would carry this thing like, you know, I'd say I wanted to do it, but didn't want to do it. And it would explode in another way. And what happened, though, is, through all this counseling and the therapy and the fight to bring our marriage back to life, we became brutally honest with each other, but not in an insulting way, but in a really intimate way, like true intimacy, where you know everything about me, inside and out, and you choose to love me anyway.
Well, and see, I felt that I was honest. He was the one who wasn't honest.
No, it's true. I definitely would say that.
I always said what I felt, unless I thought he was going to be angry because I said it. Now, that's probably the only way that I was not honest, was when there was an element of fear.
But that's what I'm saying.
Of his reprisal, yeah.
If we could wind out of that a little bit. Although, actually, there is one more thing I want to ask about that disagreeing. That disagreeing. Was it a conscious decision by you guys to include disagreements in your book? I mean, disagreements in your narration of the book.
I don't know. It was kind of in the moment. And as we were sitting with our team from Audible, discussing what was going to be outlined, there were times my husband would say something, I would be like, give me a break. You know? And they were like, we need to keep that.
Yeah,
you know?
Exactly. Yes.
No,
Yeah.
but we again, the whole purpose of the book was to show people that they are not alone. Because I'll be honest, I felt I was the only guy who had these kind of issues until I found out I wasn't. Or there's marriages that end that are supposed to end happily ever after. And everything is supposed to be that way, but we all know that's not true. And so even with the little disagreements, the little honesty and the sparks of, hey, wait a minute, that didn't go down like that. Rebecca loves to say, that didn't happen that way,
I know. I'm
get,
like the Paul Harvey. I'm like the rest of the story.
Yeah,
Terry.
yeah. But I thought this is what people need to hear.
Yeah.
Because because this is the thing. Even in today's society, everyone is supposed to agree, but we don't. And the fact is that people don't all agree, but you still have to get along and you still have to find ways to make it work. There's been so many times where we were like, you know what? We'll just go back to that because I don't feel we're on the same page here. But if you prove me wrong, cool. And if I prove you wrong, you got to say cool. You know what I mean?
That would help, especially on Twitter.
Yes.
There's a little detail that was left out of your history together that I want to ask about, because you kind of talk around how you got together. You talk about the stuff leading up to it, and then the stuff after it. I'm curious about the tipping point. This is for you, Rebecca. When did you decide that you were going to become more than friends? I mean, because it's pretty well outlined in the book why you're resistant to it.
This is an interesting story, and our courtship was not what I would call typical. We met through a friend who thought we would be a great couple. And though we went to the same school, I'm 2 years older, and he played football and I did theater, so we would have never crossed paths.
Right.
And he came to my church where I was serving as their music director, and this friend introduced us, and he gives me this little cheesy compliment about how he likes the way I play the keyboard.
All right.
And I looked at him like, oh, okay, I know what you're about, dude. Don't even play me, And what began to happen was this same friend had a girlfriend. And every so often, he would call me up and say, hey, Rebecca, we're going to all go bowling. Why don't you come with us? And I was a single mother at the time. I had a little baby girl, my oldest, Naomi, who is 34 now. And she was probably between 6 and 9 months old. So you can imagine, as a single mom, I didn't go anywhere. And when you're a single mom, you're in that no man's land where your married friends don't invite you out because you don't have a man. And the singles don't invite you out because you've got a kid. So I stayed home a lot, and I went to school and went to work and went to church and went to school and went to work and to church. And so I welcomed any opportunity to get out. But what would happen was I'd show up at the event, and it was Joe and his girlfriend and Terry
and me.
And me.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, I see what's popping here. And I think that Terry and I, didn't we both kind of resent it? I think we both.
Yeah, at first it was a little.
At first we were
what
both
are y'all
like,
trying to do?
oh, this is stupid, And but the more I got to know Terry, I genuinely liked him. I still was really turned off by the fact that he was younger than me. I really didn't care for athletes, just a stereotype. I mean, no love lost, but I always swore I would never marry or date some guy who thought he was a big shot. You know what I mean? And Terry was humble. He was one of those people who acted very nice and very polite and nice to meet you, Sister Rebecca. But he had a very big ego. And all he talked about how he was going to be rich and famous and play in the NFL.
I did.
And all I thought was, you're a bunch of hot air and you can go sit down over there, But he won me over. He just was, he was just one of the sweetest guys that I'd ever met, really. He was good with my daughter, which was a big sign to me that he was a good person. He was very sweet to little Naomi. He played with her. He'd buy her candy, all those kind of things. But I tell this in the book all the time that I had made this list to God. I'd written out a prayer of the kind of man I wanted to marry. And I started to have these, what would I call them? Intuitions or visions, which I'm prone to do. As my husband will tell you, I've seen a lot of things before they've happened. And I started to wonder if this guy was in my future. And the more time we spent together, we finally did go on a real date, meaning he paid. And that night was different. That night we went to dinner at like a fancy restaurant. We talked about, I talked about school and how I was trying to finish school and what I was going to do with my life, maybe, He talked about what he was going to do with his life, which was, I'm going to go pro. And it just was such a lovely evening that there was this, I don't know, you know how people say the stars were twinkling brighter and the moon was shining, and it just began to feel like there was a love connection there. And after dinner, we went to an outdoor festival, similar to like here in LA, we have these festivals. And a band that I used to sing with was playing at this festival. Yeah. So I said, let's go hear, this band I used to play with. In fact, I used to date one of the guys in the band. So I said, let's go hear the band. And
but I couldn't get in. I was too young.
Yeah. And in the state of Michigan, you could not go into a place where there was alcohol unless you were 21. And he was only 20 years old. So I begged the doorman. I said, look, put a mark on both our hands and we won't drink, because we don't drink anyway. But we, this is my band and we just want to come. So the guy said, okay, fine, let us in. And we're trying to wade through the crowd. And Terry stopped me because I was pulling him through the crowd. He stopped me and got in front of me, and he started to lead me through the crowd. And I suddenly had this little moment like, I kind of feel like a princess here. This guy is taking control. And we got to the dance floor, and while we were dancing, I had a vision. I had what people call an epiphany or a life moment, a God moment, the heavens open. And I saw in this vision that I was walking around the room holding Terry's hand, and I was introducing him to people as my husband. Wow. And then I popped back out of this vision, and I was like, okay, that was crazy. I hardly know this guy, and I'm not trying to get married now. I'm trying to go to New York, and do Broadway. And I kept having moments like that. To the fact that finally one day, I called him on the phone and I said, we need to talk, because I don't really know what this is. Are we in a relationship? What is this? And he says, well, I would feel better if we talk in person, not let me come over. Yeah. So he jumps in the car and comes over to I'm living in a duplex in Little Kalamazoo, Michigan. And he sits down and he very earnestly looks at the floor, looks back up at me, and I'm prepped for, I love you as a friend, you have a baby, blah, 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 I was prepped for rejection. And he says to me, I don't want to offend you, Sister Rebecca, because that's how we talk in church, Sister Rebecca, Brother Terry. He said, but I think I'm supposed to marry you. Wow. And I said, I think you're right. And it was just this kind of, it's like I knew before I knew. So in a way, it went backwards. We had this kind of psychic connection, if you want to call it that. And then we began to actually court each other. We went through premarital counseling. We read books together and just went through this whole process of deciding, could we really make a life together? And the ways that I knew he was the right person was because he met all these qualifications on my list. He was a man of faith. He loved kids. He wanted to serve community and serve humanity, which was something Terry had been doing. And I told God that I wanted a man who was either an actor or a singer or a musician or a producer or a writer, because I was a thespian and an artist, and I needed someone who understood me. And everything on my list was in him. And little by little, I began to believe that I had kind of met my destiny. And so about a year and a half, we knew each other. About a year and a half from the time we knew each other, we got married, and we were babies.
The day before my 21st birthday.
That's right. I'm so surprised you didn't put that story in the book. That would have fit right in. I mean,
Well, that's so much real estate.
I think
bonus.
we alluded to it a little bit, but we didn't have what I would call traditional dating experience, because part of our Christian belief system is that you are celibate while you're dating. And I had already had one baby, wasn't trying to have two. So I said, so we were celibate. And then as we dated each other and thought about marriage, our church required that if you were going to be married at the church, you had to go through their premarital course. And so we went through the premarital course, and we answered a lot of those questions. Where do you want to live? How many children do you want? What are your dreams for the future? What would you do if your wife got sick? What would you do if your husband lost his job? Because the goal in the premarital counseling was to prepare you for the level of commitment that marriage really was. And I don't know how prepared we really were, but we really tried.
One thing I want to say about the book, we are going on 32 years, and it feels like we have lived 15 different lives.
Yeah.
So the big task of this book was honing down,
Yeah.
because we could have gone on.
Oh, yeah, there are several more books.
Oh, I'm just saying, it could have covered the sports era, the Rebecca music era, the my acting era.
The infertility issues.
Yeah.
We lost we've had 3 miscarriages.
The financial issues.
Yeah.
I mean, it could have just kept going, and so and that's the thing about the editors and good people at Audible really did a good job of keeping us on task.
Yeah.
Because believe me, there was so much more that didn't make it.
Yeah.
It was about editing. Good writing is about what you don't put in there. Literally cutting and editing. And but like I said, we definitely have about 3 more books that we want to write.
At least.
I can see that I'm starting to run up the time when I'm going to have to go to the audience questions, but there are a couple things I need to ask you about. The first, as I said earlier, is toxic masculinity, which is a theme in this, and I know you've given a lot of thought to, Terry. And it's, I think, particularly interesting coming through the vessel of you because of who you are and what you represent, an former NFL player, and frankly known for your very muscular physique, that a person like you carrying this message has a chance to maybe reach people who would otherwise poo-poo it, possibly. That when you hear this thought about so deeply from somebody who wants to convey those thoughts to you, who's lived through this, maybe it carries some more weight. Do you think that there's that there's some truth to that maybe you've been able to reach some people? Have people responded to you who've said that maybe your position or who you are has helped that message get through?
Yes, definitely. I know that because first of all, what's really wild, and I just got to say it like this, is the fact that the culture that I grew up in, when you're talking about Black culture, there was sports culture, hood culture,
Yeah.
and every one of those things taught me that I was worth more than the women in my life as a man. And it was, it's either my way or the highway. I had the whole attitude that simply because I was a man, I was worth more than all the women in my life. And I truly believe that. Like,
he never said it, but he acted.
I never said it. I wouldn't even have the nerve to say it. But everything, all my actions pointed to that. And it's kind of like believing that the earth, excuse me, that the sun goes around the earth, and basing all your science on that. But the day you find out that the earth goes around the sun, now you can actually leave the atmosphere. Now you've got it correct. And the problem with that was, it was so many what I call aha moments, wake up calls, things that I had believed were true that just weren't. And I had to raise my life and build it back up brick by brick. I don't know what else to say. I was that guy, and I was angry. I was competitive. I was mean. I was duplicitous. I had a double life, and I thought that's the way to be a man. I really, really thought it's really about, it's either me or you. And today it's going to be you. That was my attitude about everything. And it was a lie.
Well, as I say, I think it's valuable for anybody, but specifically for somebody in your position to be speaking out, just as it was, I think, very valuable for someone in your position to be speaking out about sexual harassment and your experience therein. Okay, there's something else I want to talk about, but I was hoping to clear with you both before, but we didn't get a chance to speak beforehand. It's about what, Rebecca, what you reveal at the end of the book about yourself and your health. Is that are you comfortable talking about that a little bit?
Oh, about the cancer.
Yeah.
Yes.
My question about that is that I hope that you two, it's another way of you two pulling together. And I wonder, Rebecca, what you've learned about Terry from the way he's responded to this crisis. I mean, this great, great crisis in your lives.
Mm.
And Terry, I'll ask you the same question about her, but first, Rebecca.
Well, something that a lot of people don't know is that my mother-in-law battled cancer. She did not actually die from the cancer, but she did have some secondary infections that I believe were complicated by her chemotherapy treatment and her immune system being compromised. And then on top of that, in the middle of the Flint water crisis, she passed away. So when I went to my husband and told him, honey, I got that phone call, I have a lump in my breast, and they said it's cancer. My husband looked like he was going to melt through the floor. And I just smacked him. I said, do not look at me like that. I said, I don't need you to feel sorry for me because we're going to fight. So I need you to be strong, and I need you to expect me to make it. Now, in fairness, my diagnosis was stage 1. And so even though I could have gone a kind of minimal route with surgery, I could have done like a lumpectomy and, some radiation, et cetera. I felt very strongly inside myself that I should do a mastectomy, and eventually elected to do a double. Just to say, hey, I don't want to spend the next 10 years worrying about the other side, And what my husband showed me in that time was just that he knew how to step up to the plate. Because literally 2 weeks after my surgery, the country was shut down.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And mind you, my son, and this is how life is, it's bitter and sweet at the same time. The night before I got the call from the doctor, my son had just been cast in his first professional acting role on the show he's now doing for Nickelodeon. So we're celebrating, we're screaming, and then I'm like, oh snap! Now I have another job. I have to take this kid to work every day. Holy cow! I gotta hire some more people, you know. And being so excited about all that, and then the very next morning, the doctor calls me. And in one sense, I had this strange peace because I have always said that I feel like God speaks to me. And even before the diagnosis, I remember doing the biopsy, that strange feeling like, you know what? If this turns out to be positive, just be radical, just be tough, cut it all off if you have to, rebuild it if you have to, whatever you have to do. Don't be afraid to just make tough choices. So when the lady called me, I already had my mind made up. And before the doctor even gave me the consultation about what she recommended, I said, and one of the options was mastectomy. I said, I want that. She's like, are you sure? I said, yes, let's do that. And we might take the other one. And I said, because I don't want to play. And I'm very thankful that there was no spread. There was nothing in the lymph node, nothing that required chemo. Yep. So I'm a year and so many days cancer-free. And I will continue to be monitored. But, you know, and I'm thankful to be alive. But, you know, we had to send the housekeeper home. Sorry, that's rich people problems, but I have a housekeeper. And we had to send her home during COVID.
Yep.
And so literally, I took my son to work a week after my surgery. Me and the assistant drove him to work for 2 weeks. Every day, 6, 7 in the morning. And then they shut us down. And then I really had time to heal. And my husband cooked, he cleaned, he hounded the kids to stay on their schoolwork. And he was, you know, all the things that I hoped he would be. And he just took care of me. And the thing that I think I learned the most about Terry, and I wasn't surprised that he would take good care of me because he had already shown me in his attempts to rebuild the marriage, you know, after D-Day, that he was committed to me, that he wasn't going to let anything destroy our marriage. But what surprised me was how scared he was. Because I've never seen this man really be afraid of anything. But he sure was afraid of losing me.
Terry, do you want to comment about what you discovered about Rebecca during this?
Oh my goodness. First of all, her courage. You know, I'm used to things you can fight. You know, I'm used to things you could swing at. You know, things you can, if it's broke, you can grab it and fix it. But there was nothing to grab. You know, it was kind of like I felt so helpless. And the way she had to wake me up, I thought, whoa, because she was like, hey, you know, like, listen to me. I'm going to fight this. We are going to win. And I just saw a warrior that I was like, this is what just being a true warrior is all about. Like the strength that she showed. And I mean, it probably saved her life simply because if she had waited even a month or two, she wouldn't have been able to go to the hospital.
Yeah.
And wouldn't have been able to do any of this stuff because the hospitals were shut down.
And really, thank God my son got that show because that was the reason that I harassed the doctors. I harassed my surgeon for 2, 3, 4 weeks. You need to book me. You need to book me now because I have to take my son to work.
Yeah, and we didn't know the world would be shutting down. Yeah. We had no clue.
Literally 2 weeks after I had my surgery on March 3rd, and 2 weeks later, we were all locked in our houses.
But what I learned was just she's a warrior. She's always been a warrior. And her strength and her resolve has saved our family so many times that I can't even count. It just reiterated who she is. And it's just amazing to be able to live a life with a warrior like this.
I really appreciate you guys talking about that. I'm sorry we didn't get to discuss it first, but please accept my sincere congratulations and best wishes for you to, congratulations that you're a year plus cancer-free, and let's all hope that it stays that way. Now, we got to get to some audience questions. There are a lot of them. We'll get through the ones we can. First, Caitlin asks, what advice do you have to new parents?
New parents.
Mm-hmm.
My favorite thing to tell new parents, and especially moms, is take care of yourself. When the baby's sleeping, you sleep. Don't try to do the laundry. Don't try to get everything done. Make sure you take care of yourself. And secondly, put your marriage first. Do not neglect your marriage because of the child. Because when those kids grow up, they're going to leave home. You want to hopefully still have your marriage. And that's always my mantra.
One thing I say to my kids, because they like to play parent, play one parent against the other. And I tell them, I'm closer to her than you, and I made you. So you got to know it's never going to be, me against her. It's just not going to happen.
Good advice. All right. Brianna, with an I and one N, asks, what would you say to someone who is struggling to find confidence in their work? And this is a really good question for you, Terry, because of your struggles in the NFL and then your career shift.
This is what I would say. And you have to examine where you lost confidence, because this world has a way of telling you that you either have things or you don't. If you try to sing, they'll tell you, oh, you just don't have it. If you try to learn math, no, you're just not mathematically inclined. I mean, schools are based on, well, you just either have it or you don't. And what happens is you tend to write off kids at 6 years old, 7 years old. And people grow up just saying, I'm not good.
Yeah.
But this is the thing. Everything is a skill.
Yeah.
Everything. And you can do whatever you want if you're willing to pay the price. Now, I didn't even start acting until I was 30 years old. 30. I never acted before in my life. And you're talking about an ex-football player who's just tried to do his whole thing. But I had learned that everything is learnable. And the one thing that helped me and gave me confidence is that I just knew that if I kept doing it long enough, I will get good. Now, there were times where I was like, I'm not good right now, and this is where everything is. And confidence comes by doing.
Yeah.
Doing. It doesn't come by talking about it. It doesn't come from tweeting about it. It comes from doing. And I learned on the fly.
What's the book that we love? Talent is overrated.
Yes.
Talent is like the seed, but your work is the water and the soil.
That's right.
There are plenty of talented people who never actualize things that are inside them. But if you have a talent and you work at that talent, you can eventually get where you're trying to go.
And you'll have the confidence.
I always try to hold up Jerry Rice to my kids and say he wasn't the fastest or the tallest. He couldn't jump the highest. He worked the hardest, and he became the greatest of all time. 49ers. Question here from Vince. Vince asks, how was writing the book different than acting in movies? And I'm going to guess what he might mean by that is, as a creative endeavor, maybe, what did you have to pull out of yourself?
Ooh, for me, I mean, just being an actor, you're always free to say what other people write, which is awesome. You can just jump in, and there's a time where I know a lot of actors, including myself, where you can hide in characters. it's a beautiful place to just stop time.
Mhm.
And you can just become another person, and you don't really have to face your own issues, your own problems. But with a
Right.
with a book like this, you're always looking in the mirror. It's always about introspection. It's always, there were times where Rebecca, I would say, "Hey, it went like this." She said, "No, it didn't. No, it went like that." And I'm like, "Oh, it did." It's these eye-opening moments that hurt. It's very painful. And that's the difference, I would say. With acting, you pretend to be in pain. But in writing a book like this, you're dealing with pain over and over. There were so many times my stomach would get upset because I remembered the person I was and what I had done. And it all came back. And there's like a very, very, it would be a sick feeling that would come back because you did that. Now, the big thing is for me was not to make it shame. It was more just acknowledgement of what it was. And because shame-based things always lead you astray. It always leads you on a bad path. And you say, I am bad when you're dealing with shame, not that you did something wrong.
Right.
And so it was very important to me to deal with this in a really realistic way, and be able to say it, but kind of flush it out by saying it. You know what I mean? And sitting in a moment. There were days, it was very sad days. There were times I was in the studio and I was in tears. I mean, what can I say? In tears, and lost it. Literally.
Yeah, he
speak.
cried more than me.
I did. I did. There were times I just couldn't speak anymore.
Yeah.
And I had to gather my thoughts and get myself together and go back at it.
That's an interesting distinction you make about shame. And I'd imagine that would also help in an approach as an actor to be specific and not general about it. I'm not a villain. I'm a guy who's doing these things.
Yes.
So the next question is from, let's see how much time next question is from Nikki. If you had to choose the top 3 things that are important to make a marriage thrive, what would they be? She has a second part of that question about intimacy, but let's stick with this first. The top 3 things that are important to make a marriage thrive.
My favorite answer that I love to give the people when they ask this is what I call the F word, and that is forgiveness.
Mm-hmm.
You cannot hold grudges in your marriage. Certainly, you have to discuss things that bother you. Hopefully, the person that you're discussing it with, your spouse, hears and empathizes and understands. Sometimes they don't. Whether they hear you and understand or whether they don't, forgiveness is a practice that keeps you from being bitter. So forgiveness is one, absolutely.
I want to add to the second for me is you cannot love someone and control them at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
There were many, many times I had confused love, but what I was trying to do was control her. And I would throw tantrums. I would be, make life very uncomfortable for her until she did what I wanted. It was subtle manipulation and sometimes not so subtle. But it was just control. And if I kept Rebecca locked up in a basement, and is it really love? If she couldn't go anywhere, if she couldn't do anything. But in my head, I love her. So that's it. And let me tell you.
And that goes for wives too. Wives can be controlling in certain ways, with manipulation, with withholding sex, withholding affection. There are a lot of ways that you don't have to intimidate someone to control them. And I think that what Terry's saying about love being free is so key. It's not wrong to have expectations in marriage, but it's certainly wrong to hold someone as a prisoner to something that may or may not be a fantasy, and to allow them to be who they are. You have to allow your partner to be themselves,
Yeah.
because that's what true love is. True love is really unconditional. And it's not to say that there are no conditions in marriage or there's nothing you should expect, but at the heart of it, every human being wants to be loved for who they are.
And the third thing is honesty.
Yeah.
True honesty.
Transparency. Yes.
You cannot have intimacy without honesty. For years, I was hiding who I was to Rebecca in order to keep an image, in order to keep this image of this strong man, this guy who's got it all under control. And I was crumbling in the inside. I knew people who had gambling addictions, the whole thing, and wouldn't tell their wives until they come to get the house. You know, these are issues that the honesty has to be there in order to have real intimacy. And our intimacy was suffering simply because there were so many times I wasn't honest. So she was like, I can't get in with you. How can I ever be intimate with you if I don't really know who you are or how you're feeling?
And that's really born out of fear.
Yeah.
The fear of really being rejected. And we play those games. We hide behind those masks because we feel that if the person really knows who we are, that they won't love us.
Yeah.
But you can never really know how loved you are until you let yourself be revealed.
I'm going to try to squeeze in one more question because I think it's a really good question to end on.
Okay.
The next question is from another Brianna. Let's just pronounce her name Brianna so we can make a difference. Was there a point in which you wanted to give up? If so, what helped motivate yourself to keep going? Now, when she says give up, I want to interpret that as give up on your marriage. Was there a point where you wanted to give up on the marriage, and what motivated you to keep going with the marriage?
Mm-hmm.
Well, on my end, yes, there were many points that I wanted to give up. There was a point in time where we were in what we call, what would we call it? Disclosure.
Yes.
Disclosure and revelation and talking it out. We were in therapy. We were at rehab. And I definitely felt like quitting. And what helped me to not give up was that my husband was so determined to change. He was so willing and honest, willing to be transparent with me, willing to put up with all my questions. He was willing to put his whole life and career on the line by taking, was it 10 days off of work or whatever it was to go to rehab. And his commitment to the work of his own addiction, it startled me, to be honest with you. It surprised me. It shocked me. I fully expected my husband to just bottom out. Mm-hmm. When I told him I was done with him and he couldn't come home anymore, I thought he was just going to go wild out. And like in 2 weeks, I was going to see him on the red carpet with some other chick. You know, I did not expect the response that I got from Terry.
I want to say this, you know, in this culture and the way we are right now, you know, the whole thing is, you know, I'm bad, my bad. I said, I'm sorry, my bad. Mm. But the thing I realized more than ever was that I needed to make amends. And I was willing to do anything I had to do to save my marriage. And I mean, crawl, scrape, scratch, beg, we went on a 90-day sex fast. I remember that was part of the therapy. And then we went to 75 days. I said, we need to do it again. Because we said, I need to get to that 90 days. I want to do everything I'm supposed to do. There were lie detector tests.
Yeah.
There were.
I made him take a lie detector.
Yeah. I mean, I said, I am willing to do whatever
counselor told me
it
to
takes.
Do that, by the way.
Whatever I had to do, I was willing to do. And
then I want to say that even though he was doing all of that, there were some times I still didn't believe him because
Right.
my trust had been so broken. You have to understand, I had this image of my husband that I now discovered was not who he really was.
Yeah.
And then when he would tell me he was sorry and he was changing, I'm like, oh, he's an actor. You know, he's putting it on for me. But he really just over time, his actions proved true to what he said. And I think that's the big key. You don't go by what people say, you go by what they do.
Mm.
And in time, the things that he said matched up to the things he did. And he rebuilt my trust in him as a person. Secondly, and I cannot leave this out, my faith is very key to this restoration because throughout the process in the times that I wanted to quit, something always came to me like a sign from God that number one, that this fight was worth fighting. Number two, that if we hung in here, we could have something better. And number three, that the possibility of losing my husband forever was not something I thought I wanted to live with the regret of. And each time I had my bags packed and I was out looking for apartments and trying to, buy a new car and get a new job, something or someone would come up to me and tell me some long story about how they wish they had saved their first marriage. And I just thought, what in the world? Like, this is a conspiracy, Something greater than me was fighting for our marriage. And I believe it was God.
Okay, we are out of time. Rebecca, Terry, I want to thank you guys for taking part, for being here for this conversation, and for your candor, for opening up about some of these things. Folks, if you're interested in hearing more about this and checking out Stronger Together, then you can go to Audible. And I hope you all enjoyed the conversation and they're very generous opening up about these topics. And I hope you enjoy the rest of the festival. We hope to see all of you folks in the flesh sometime soon. Rebecca, Terry, thank you so much.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you.
Michael.